In the previous video, I talked about how Superman the movie from 1978 completely defined superheroes on the big screen, and why it still holds such a respected position in the landscape of superhero cinema today, why it holds up so well. And it's honestly crazy to think that between 1978 and now, as far as big screen Superman motion pictures go, there have only been 2 iterations of this character. The classic Christopher Reeve Superman and Henry Cavill's modern DC Extended Universe Superman. Now, of course, there is Superman Returns with Brandon Routh, but if you remember, that wasn't a reboot. Brandon Routh is effectively playing the same Superman that Christopher Reeve was. So it's a different actor, but it's the same Superman. So what I'm going to be doing in today's video is comparing the 2 quintessential stories of each Superman. 1978's Superman the Movie for classic Superman, and 2013's Man of Steel for the modern Superman. I just want to state what this video is not going to be. This is not a contest between these 2 films, because I feel like to say that one of them is better than the other undermines what makes both of these films great. I love Superman, I love movies, and I love both Man of Steel and Superman 1978 respectively. So Superman 1978 and Man of Steel both share quite a bit in common structurally. Both of these films had a very big task at hand, but I think it is safe to say that Superman the movie had more to prove, as Superman the movie was the very first serious superhero film. This film didn't just set out to introduce us to Superman, it set out to introduce mainstream audiences to the cinematic potential of superheroes. With Man of Steel, that groundwork was very much done, as Man of Steel released in a post-Avengers 1 world. That isn't to say that Man of Steel didn't have its challenges though, as by the time Man of Steel began production, Superman as a property was struggling to escape a certain stigma. Following the release of Superman the movie and prior to the release of Man of Steel were some truly terrible Superman sequels. While Superman 2 is considered a worthy follow-up, Superman 3 would go on to abandon the logic, the rhyme, the reason, and compelling narrative that made Superman the movie work. Follow that up with the abysmal production of 1987's Superman for the Quest for Peace. We wouldn't see another Superman film again until 2006's Superman Returns, which felt more like a pale imitation of what had come before than a sequel or a movie in its own right. So Man of Steel needed to be the first good Superman film since Superman 2, which released in 1980. So while Superman the movie needed to prove that superheroes can work on screen in the first place, Man of Steel needed to fight an uphill battle against the stigma that surrounded the character of Superman. Which is why, while Man of Steel tries to distance itself from the classic 1970s Superman, it evidently borrows a lot from 1978's classic Superman film, as both of these films introduce us to their respective Supermen through the origin story, which means that we follow a similar structure. Both films begin on Krypton, with General Zod being exiled to the Phantom Zone and Jor-El sending Superman off to Earth. And there is just as much attention to detail in how this is handled. Lara has her doubts about sending Kal-El to Earth, because of how his different abilities in Earth's atmosphere will make him a freak. In both films we get background about the inactivity of Krypton's leaders leading to the planet's destruction. However, this doesn't make Man of Steel too samey, as another thing that Man of Steel and Superman the movie have in common is how they push the boundaries for visuals of their time. Krypton's depiction in Superman the movie is absolutely iconic. These environments are depicted through sweeping long shots of the landscapes, which all have a very white crystalline appearance to them. This more advanced civilization has a very space-agey, very sterile look to it, which carries over to the sets as well. In Man of Steel, through the help of computer graphics, Krypton has a much more organic look to it. Sweeping metal structures penetrate the mountains. We've got Jor-El riding on the back of a flying creature. In Man of Steel, we learn a lot more about how Krypton works as a planet, through visuals that likely couldn't have been achieved in 1978. We learn more about how Kryptonians are bred and how Superman differs, with Kal-El being the first organic birth on Krypton since Kryptonians started being bred artificially, effectively making Jor-El and Lara fugitives. The visuals are absolutely breathtaking, and everything has so much movement to it. And of course, there is the immediate comparison between the way the Phantom Zone is portrayed in both Man of Steel Steel and Superman 1978. In Man of Steel, everything feels bigger thanks to the strides made in computer graphics, and this feels like the natural progression of how you would portray Krypton in the modern day. One point that my friend and supporter Heath Gleason had to say is that neither of these planets feel inhabitable though. For an advanced society, Krypton feels desolate. Everything feels just like the bare bones, the essentials. But like, what do Kryptonians do for fun? My defense was that in 1978, maybe one of those crystals had a Burger King in it, or in the case of Man of Steel, maybe one of those penis buildings has a Burger King in it. But sure, I guess maybe they did miss an opportunity to do a deeper dive into Krypton in 2013's Man of Steel. So from here, both films once again take a pretty similar direction. Baby Kal-El arrives on Earth and is taken into the care of Jonathan and Martha Kent. In 1978, we didn't spend a lot of time with this, as the film had a bit more to introduce yet. Lex Luthor would be the main villain of Superman 1978 to be introduced later in the film. However, in Man of Steel, the narrative is a little bit more streamlined, with General Zod returning midway into the movie. Because Man of Steel doesn't have to introduce another villain, we get to spend a bit more time getting to know Clark Kent. And because Man of Steel is generally a bit more nihilistic and realistic than its predecessor, we see that living with these abilities for a young Clark Kent does have its hardships, as it takes him a bit of time to understand how his senses adapt to planet Earth's atmosphere, and learn how to control them. As well as that, the theme of cynicism towards Superman is introduced much earlier on in Man of Steel, through Jonathan Kent, who urges Clark not to reveal to the world that he has these superpowers because he does not believe that humanity will accept him as one of them if he does. He wants Clark to have the best life he can as a human being, and that simply will not be possible if he reveals himself as a superpowered, godlike creature. But young Clark is confronted with a number of dangerous situations, one of them involving his school bus, with a lot of kids in fatal danger, and Clark ultimately decides to act and save them. But this is this weird moral crisis that Clark has to go through in this film. Jonathan Kent wants him to have a nice, happy life as a human being on planet Earth. But what does it mean if he can protect the lives of others, but doesn't because of that? This is put to the ultimate test when Jonathan Kent goes to rescue his dog in a tornado. Clark is able to save Jonathan Kent, but Jonathan Kent reminds him that he mustn't, and dies in the process. Obviously, this impacts Clark in a way that makes him really question why he has these powers, and he goes off on a search for his true destiny, where he uncovers a Kryptonian scout ship with the consciousness of Jor-El, which also contains his suit, which brings us back to where we were in Superman 1978. So obviously in Man of Steel, we've spent a lot more time getting to know Clark Kent. A lot more time has been spent on Clark's coming of age. So the Kryptonian scout ship is basically Superman's Fortress of Solitude for this version. And like the 1978 version, it does share its architecture with Krypton, so I won't go into too much detail about it. But once again, it's a great modern representation of that. A bit more explanation is given to how Jor-El is able to communicate with Superman in this version, but also the communications are done through like a liquid metal storytelling effect. In 1978, it can be assumed that Superman's costume was found in the Fortress of Solitude, but it's kind of glossed over, whereas in Man of Steel, it does come from the Kryptonian scout ship. And this time the costume really matches and feels consistent with Kryptonian architecture, giving it a very alien feel to it. While I do prefer 1978's perfect comic book accurate translation of the Superman costume, Man of Steel certainly makes an admirable effort. This is probably the perfect Superman costume for this movie, as it is absolutely covered in Kryptonian chainmail and scribe. Now, in both of these films, the first thing we see Superman do in his new costume is fly. And both of these scenes are handled with a very dramatic and ceremonious feel to them. This is the quintessential Superman rite of passage, as it should be. 1978 has that spectacular shot where we see Superman fly across the Fortress of Solitude, and it just looks like you can reach out and touch him. For 1978, that was absolutely incredible. So how would they achieve such a feat once again in 2013 and make it feel just as breathtaking as before? Well, in Man of Steel, Superman doesn't know how to fly from the get-go. He starts off by bounding, and then he has a failed attempt. But it's more that he's testing his powers, testing his limitations and his abilities, until he finally gets the hang of it. And it is a huge moment. Superman is much more bullet-like in his flight than he ever was in 1978, partially thanks to the strides made in computer graphics. Obviously, a lot of this is CGI, which allows them to have more control over how Superman flies through these environments, how the environments react to him, and this is where they get really creative, is how the environments react to Superman as he moves. As Superman is preparing to fly, one of the first things we see is a close-up of his fist on the ground, watching as little particles of dust and rock float up and rise off of the ground around his hand. And we see him effectively fly across the world, breaking the sound barrier, through valleys and mountains and snow. I think a personal highlight of this sequence for me is when he's flying through Africa and there's this horde of giraffes running, and he just flies through them and they react to him and they run away. They got so creative with this scene, and it's honestly worth the price of a movie ticket for just this scene alone. Not to mention, Hans Zimmer's score over this scene is nothing short of iconic. This scene is the birth of Superman, and it is a trip around the world and up into space, and the music fits it perfectly. So let's talk about the scores for both of these movies as well while we're here. John Williams' score is magical and iconic. There will never be a more quintessential Superman theme than John Williams' theme. It is the definition of this big American fanfare. Hans Zimmer goes for a more percussive route. There's a lot more sort of variety in the instrumentation, which makes for a very visceral feel to the film, which perfectly fits Zack Snyder's directing style. So the flight scene in 1978 Superman the movie is breathtaking, and I think Man of Steel found the perfect way to update that moment for the modern technology they have available, which is exactly what this flight scene needed to be. Now, in both of these movies, Superman does of course have Lois Lane, but it is a very different dynamic. For starters, Clark Kent does not work at the Daily Planet in Man of Steel until the very end, where in 1978 Superman, he works at the Daily Planet pretty much immediately after he gets his costume. And that's where he meets Lois Lane in that film. In Man of Steel, Lois Lane meets Kal-El inside the Kryptonian scout ship during an expedition, when Kal-El protects her from the Kryptonian scout ship's security measures. In both 1978 Superman and Man of Steel, Lois Lane wants to investigate Superman. She wants to know more about him. But their dynamic could not be more different. In 1978 Superman the movie, Lois Lane is the prime example of the cynicism that exists in the world towards the Big Blue Boy Scout. And it is through Superman's ability to enlighten Lois Lane that the two kind of fall in love and share some chemistry. In Man of Steel, Superman falls in love with Lois Lane because she seems to be the only person on the planet that is as idealistic as he is. They both share the same sense of morality and integrity, and she ends up being one of the only people on planet Earth that truly believes in him, making it effectively them against the world, a world that fears Superman and fears his power. A large part of this film is Superman gaining the trust of humanity, which is made more difficult in the wake of a Kryptonian invasion after General Zod escapes the Phantom Zone. Now, I think this is something that Man of Steel does very efficiently. The fact that we are introduced to General Zod at the very start of the film, like we are in Superman 1978, but General Zod goes on to be the main villain of the film as opposed to introducing Lex Luthor halfway into the film. Now, one thing I praised Superman 1978 for was Superman and Lex Luthor's dynamic. How Lex Luthor is effectively the opposite of Superman. Superman has physical power, Lex Luthor has social and financial power. Superman wants to use his power for selfless acts, Lex Luthor wants to use his powers for selfish acts. So with that brilliant dynamic in mind, how do Superman and General Zod in Man of Steel compare? There is a good sense of juxtaposition between Superman and General Zod. They are both aliens arriving on Earth that want to make Earth their home, but in two very different ways. Superman wants to coexist with humanity as a human being, while General Zod wants to use his power to terraform Earth and transform it into a new Krypton, completely disregarding all life that exists on the planet already. And he is prepared to tear the planet to shreds in order to do so. This does have kind of a parallel with 1978's Lex Luthor, who wanted to transform California into his own image through use of his own sense of power and disregarding all the lives that would be lost in that as well. So it's nice to see that Superman's dynamic with General Zod in Man of Steel is just as good as his dynamic with Lex Luthor in 1978 Superman. Now, obviously General Zod and his cronies are a much more physical threat than Lex Luthor ever was, so the ways in which Superman's abilities are showcased in Man of Steel are completely different to how they are showcased in Superman 1978. In 1978, we see more of Superman's powers being used for the sake of good deeds, rescue sequences, stopping petty thugs, and they're pretty minimalistic. It's not a film that wears its action on its sleeve, it's more about the character of Superman. And this can be boiled down to the limitations of technology at the time. Limits that Man of Steel, a newer film, doesn't have to worry about. So Man of Steel prides itself on its larger-than-life action, which, boy, is there a lot of it. This is very much a large-scale disaster movie, as Superman needs to stop the Kryptonians from tearing his home apart, and destroying all life on Earth with that. Part of his key motivation being the kindness he sees in humanity through Lois Lane, as opposed to the cynicism that he's been treated with before. Now, these fight scenes are incredibly chaotic. There's a lot of collateral damage, it's very unrelenting, and a lot of people tend to complain about this. This movie has a very high implied death toll, as Superman and the Kryptonians throw each other through building after building after building. The Kryptonian terraforming process is a very violent one, with Earth's entire atmosphere effectively being ground and gravity being manipulated. Now, I'm sorry, but am I the only one that really appreciates the creativity in these action sequences? We've got Superman battling it out with the World Engine, a giant Kryptonian battleship, while gravity is constantly in flux. It's incredible. And it's all beautifully filmed by DOP Amir Mokri. Not to mention, Superman doesn't really have much control over the situation in these battles. There are a few occasions where he tries to take Zod to space, but generally he ends up crashing back down. Zod doesn't really know how to deal with his defeat either, because he's been bred only to protect Krypton, and he has absolutely no idea how to deal with it when Krypton has been destroyed and all of his resources to terraform Earth into the new Krypton have been destroyed. So by the end, he just decides to go out of his way to destroy absolutely everything he can, and the performances here from Henry Cavill and Michael Shannon are just terrific, as Henry Cavill realizes there's nothing he can do to stop General Zod. General Zod is never going to stop. He's been effectively defeated, his crusade is effectively over, yet he's still trying to destroy everyone. Superman realizes he has no choice but to kill the last other Kryptonian to protect humanity, a species that has, outside of Lois Lane and Mark Kent, pretty much rejected him. In this scene, Superman has chosen humanity and made a very painful decision. In the case of Superman 1978, Superman doesn't have to make such a decision. It is a much lighter film overall, with Lex Luthor accepting defeat after Superman rescues California. So to summarize, Superman 1978 is pure classic Hollywood glitz and glam. It is a joyous occasion that gives rhyme and reason to the popular comic book character. Man of Steel for me is the natural progression of that. It hits the same notes that are intrinsic to Superman, but it does it in a way that pushes the boundaries of the time, in the same way that 1978 Superman did, which makes Man of Steel a quintessential Superman experience for the 21st century. As similar and as different as these two movies are, I absolutely adore the heck out of both of them. It's plain to see that both Richard Donner and Zack Snyder both understand and have a great deal of love for Superman. And with that, I love both of these movies equally, but for different reasons. Well, now I hand it over to you, fellow home dogs. What do you guys think? And if you did enjoy this video, might I ask you a favor? Please hit subscribe and that notification bell as your way of telling YouTube keep it coming. Likes are also highly appreciated. Now, I'm always trying to make my content better and more consistent, but this does come at a financial cost, and ad revenue isn't always going to cover putting a roof over my head and covering the subscription fees for the software I use to make these videos. So if you really enjoy this content and you feel like lending me a hand by any chance, I would be so grateful if you would consider joining my Patreon, which will also give you access to the Channel Pup official Discord server. I also have a written blog called Dr. Blogtopus over on channelpup.net. That is where I put my more critical and analytical stuff. And in the description below are links to different social media platforms where you're more than welcome to come and interact with me. So that's it for today, fellow home dogs. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on another video.